Welcome here this evening. It's nice to see everybody. I'm Shelley Fake. I'm the Chief Executive of Addenbrooke's Charitable Trust, and it's a real delight to see you on this very warm and sunny evening in Cambridge to share with you the new Cambridge Cancer Research Hospital plans. Hopefully we will inspire you this evening with our vision and the journey that we are embarking on to raise funds to bring this important hospital to Cambridge, but also the impact it will have far beyond Cambridge. You won't hear too much from me. We have Professor Richard Gilbertson, the head of Department of Oncology at Cambridge University with us, a paediatric oncologist by training, and also Dr. Hugo Ford, who's Director of Cancer Services here at Addenbrooke's. Together they represent what is excellent about cancer in Cambridge, and I'm sure you will be enthralled by the slides and the journey they will take you on. I thought it would be interesting just to give you a bit of background really to the work of Addenbrooke's Charitable Trust in cancer. But before I do, I remember that I must tell you we're not expecting a fire alarm. And if there is a fire alarm, then you should leave the way you came, through the doors at the back, and head down through the cafe, out of the exits there, onto the lawn. But there will be staff around who will help you get out. So apologies, I should have done that at the very beginning. We'll try and wrap this up by 7 o'clock so that we can spend some time with some Q&A, but also the opportunity to meet you and talk with you outside over drinks and with some canapes. At ACT, we have been fundraising for many years, and I know there are previous trustees in the room and current trustees as well, but also long-term supporters of the charity, of which there are many in this room. So thank you for your support. With your support, what we've been able to achieve are many things. We spend around £500,000 a month in the hospital with the help of our supporters on innovation, research, patient care. So many items have been enabled through the kind and generous donations of our supporters. We've funded 3 surgical robots, the 3D printing lab, ward renovations, the personalised breast cancer research activity, prostate haematology, brain tumour research, and many more research into cancer that enable us to move the story of cancer forward. And it's great to see the cancer team here as well in the audience, and we'll make sure you get to meet as many of those as possible this evening. We also support staff wellbeing. It's really important that the staff have the environment to undertake their work, but also that they are able to give the best care that they can. So we support them psychologically and with pastoral support as well during the pandemic. We did a rough estimation that we've spent almost £25 million in cancer services activity since 2005 when the charity was formed, which is quite a substantial number, and that equates to about a quarter of the money we've raised in that time. And now we're fundraising for a brand new cancer research, so we need to put all that we've learned to good use to bring this hospital to the campus. So I am going to stop speaking, and I'm going to hand you over to Professor Richard Gilbertson, and I hope you enjoy this evening.
Great, thank you very much. It's lovely to see everybody, so I'd like to add my welcome. So, as Shelley just said, my name's Richard. I'm a paediatric oncologist originally by training. I trained here in the UK, and I spent 15 years in the US at the world's biggest kiddies cancer hospital, which is in Memphis, Tennessee, which is a whole other story. And then I've been back in the university for about 1% of its entire life, which is 8 years, so a tiny amount of time. So we're going to tell you a little bit about tackling cancer, but I'm going to start with some numbers. So the first number is 130,000. And that's the number of individuals who will die this year in the UK from cancer. And that's completely unacceptable. The other number that's unacceptable is this, which is 18.3 billion. And that's how much cancer costs this country every year. That's not just the amount it costs to treat patients, it's actually a fraction of this. It's the lost productivity. So the people who are missing being at work, who are looking after elderly individuals in their family who have got cancer. All of those aspects add up to this cost and burden to the NHS. This is a much better number, and this is the number that the NHS long-term plan aspires to achieve. And that's the number of patients who will survive longer than 5 years from a diagnosis of cancer. At the moment, most patients in this country with cancer are diagnosed when their disease is late. There's blood in the toilet, there's a lump in your breast when you're in the shower, and that's too late. Also, embarrassingly in this country, somewhere about a quarter to a third of all patients are diagnosed in accident and emergency. They go because they're feeling sick, they've got a headache, again they found a lump somewhere or they're limping or whatever it might be, and they're diagnosed with cancer in A&E, and all of those patients do badly. So if we can diagnose, and you'll hear a little bit about the point of the Cancer Research Hospital, more patients early, that 55,000 patients should survive. That's a proper identified number. The dirty secret is nobody has an idea how to do it, but we do in Cambridge. We don't say that arrogantly. There is a unique collection, as you'll hear, in this part of the world, actually having spent time in the States, almost as compared to anywhere in the world, where we can actually achieve this. I'm going to pass you over quickly to Hugo, who's going to talk a little bit about the cancer facilities.
Thanks. Thank you, Richard. So, for those of you who haven't met me, my name's Hugo Ford. I'm an oncologist at Addenbrooke's. I've been an oncologist for 25 years, I suppose, and the reason that I'm here is because for that time, I've been telling people that they're going to die, and I've had just about enough of it. This is our current front door, and Richard's very keen on numbers, so I'm going to give you another number, 100,000, and that's the number of people who go through that front door every year for treatment. It's not brilliant in terms of facilities. It's been fantastically improved in terms of outpatients with the help of ACT, actually. And the wards are, to be honest, even worse. And I wanted to just share with you, if I may, the story about a great man who you will never have heard of, or most of you will never have heard of. And that is a man called David Mackay. And David was my exact contemporary as an undergraduate at Cambridge. Unlike me, however, he was a brilliant man. He started out by trying to create an artificial brain. And he did that actually rather successfully, using a number of complicated mathematic theories and so on. He then went on to do other things. He wrote the code for the software that called Dasher, which enables disabled people to speak. So that's what enabled Stephen Hawking to speak while only using his eyes, only moving his eyes. And he was Professor of Natural Philosophy at the Cavendish at the age of 35. He was the first ever Regius Professor of Engineering at Cambridge, and he died of stomach cancer at age 49. And I just wanted to share with you David's experience of what he wrote on his blog about what it's like being an inpatient on the ward at Addenbrooke's at the moment. And I hope you'll bear with me because it's a little bit long and I can't remember it. What he wrote is, "This post is about sleeping in hospital. For me, sleep is so crucial for health, but in our ward, everyone has to be checked 3 times in the night for blood pressure, oxygen saturation and pulse. So, given how my steroid doses make me sleepless anyway, I've never had more than a quarter of a night's sleep in the last 6 days in hospital. The ward is always full of lights going on and off, doors opening, special mechanical beds that make fizzing electrical noises and clunks for hours on end, and an army of crucial machines, each with their own bleeps, pings and Klingon photon torpedo sounds. Tonight, the man in the bed diagonally opposite me had an insulin checkup using the special bleep clatter bang machine with the optional mandatory bright light pointing straight in my face for 1 hour starting from 4 a.m. So this post is about coping with the sleep deficit. Basically, I don't cope, and yesterday morning I spent 10 minutes crying like a soggy jelly with the nurses who'd come to give me my 6 a.m. injections, just crying with the cumulative sadness of being stuck in a sweaty bed and unable to sleep for 5 nights. The nurses were lovely. I'd tried various sleeping pills over the last week. There hadn't been any use, so they suggested, how about going for something simpler, a nice milky cup of Horlicks? Just ask for it. So on Sunday night, I rejected all the sleeping pills and planned ahead. I felt sleepy enough to go off unaided at 10:30 p.m, and I decided to ask for the Horlicks when the 150 observation came along to see if that would sink me a second time. My 10:30 sleep didn't last fantastically because of the appalling sauna conditions that developed in our bay. I woke up roasting as if I was in a desert hotbox, rang my magic nurse bell. Annabella, I said, please could I have a milky Horlicks to help me sleep? Horlicks? Ah, she's from Barcelona. Anyway, I explained about Horlicks, and Annabella kindly went through 2 iterations of making Horlicks, the second of which was warm and milky and quite good. Unfortunately, the Horlicks didn't do the job, and I laid awake trying to sleep for over 2 hours, eventually giving up and watching 2 episodes of Big Bang Theory to try and reset myself. Then it was the aforementioned visit of the bleep clatter bang machine for my neighbour's insulin with the Gestapo light pointing in my eyes, so after a while I decided to write this instead. It's a pretty pink sunrise, and oh look, it's 6 a.m, so time for Katie to come and take another set of observations, beep, 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 and so on. I'm sorry if that was quite a long passage, but it really does convey quite a lot about what it's like being an inpatient in our wards at the moment. So, for me, David, this is exactly why we need to build this hospital in Cambridge. You know, for me, the research is what's going to take us over the line in terms of improving outcomes. And the reason that we want to do it here is because Cambridge is where there are people like David, brilliant polymaths who are able to apply their own expertise and brilliance to a problem in a totally different field and come up with a workable solution. And that's what we're going to do here. But then also, for David the everyman, the 100,000 people who go through that door, people who spend their time night on our ward, and all they need, yes, they need good medical care and good facilities, but, you know, just a good night's sleep. And we can't even offer people that now. So what we're after is something, what we're planning is something which I hope will combine those two, which will give the research, which will change the face of cancer for everyone, and also give our own local patients here a transformative experience about how they go through what people call the journey of their disease. Thank you. I think that's just what David said. So, great. Back to Richard.
Thank you, Hugo. So, if you can stand the double act for a bit longer. So, what I'd like to share with you is some of the strategic steps that we will be taking to increase cancer survival. And so, like Hugo, I've been working in cancer for 25, 30 years, and it is time for a complete change in the way we approach not just cancer, but any medicine, actually. We've trained in an era which is very, very siloed. So we have gastroenterologists, we have cardiologists, we have neurologists. Now, the secret of good medicine, I think, and the era we're in at the moment, our ability to actually capture data about individuals and actually track those individuals from multiple data streams is more potent, and we're more able to do that than ever before. And what that will allow us to do is to take the journey of the patient further and further back to when their cancer, their disease first starts. We all know cancer as being a horribly aggressive disease that might kill patients within 2 or 3 years. But the reality is that most cancers are in your body for 8 to 10 years before you know that you've got them. That gives us a period of time to actually step in and do something about them. So this is why we want to take a proactive approach to cancer. So rather than wait until you see blood in the toilet, or you realise there's a lump in your breast, or you're feeling sick, we're taking a proactive approach on your behalf. And it's not just us, it's the entire magic of the NHS. I spent 15 years in an awful system in the US, where if I walked out of the door, I knew that there was a myriad of people who could not afford healthcare. The NHS in this country is magical. It's absolutely fantastic. It's extremely expensive, but the great thing about this is it will save us money in that. But it stretches from where you live all the way through to the hospital. And we need to stop thinking about cancer care being all about the end, sort of going to the hospital where the clever doctors work and the clever nurses are, but actually beginning as a continuum through the very early stages of the disease. And that's about detecting cancer early. So Hugo mentioned these individuals who are really bright in Cambridge, the physicists, the chemists, the engineers, the mathematicians. Actually, they're going to be the heroes of this. Those individuals who are detecting, who are developing those devices that maybe plug into an iPhone, which they're doing at the moment, or you can use in Boots or Sainsbury's or Smith's or in your GP surgery. Very simple, cheap devices that will detect cancer in that 8 to 10 year period and allow us to intervene early. So the idea is that before you've got that massive runaway disease, you're detecting it at a point where we can understand its very earliest processes and actually treat you with a relatively inexpensive and relatively non-invasive approach. We also want to capture all the data that's available from patients, and we'll talk a little bit about how we're doing this. So in the olden days, we used to have x-rays that we put on a box and light shone through it and you would see the chest. That's largely gone. Everything is now digitized. So every aspect of that scan can be turned into a pixel, a little piece of light that makes up that picture. And if you've got thousands of those from patients, you can actually see stuff that you never did before. We're all terrified of artificial intelligence at the moment, mostly because our own brains are dropping to bits when you get to my age. But artificial intelligence, actually, if it's used correctly, can really help us. And the reason for that, just quickly to sort of give you an idea, is at the moment, our patients will be discussed in what we call multidisciplinary team meetings. So very clever nurses, doctors, allied healthcare professionals will sit in a room and they'll maybe spend 3 to 4 hours looking through all of the scans, all of the blood results, all of the pathology reports for 40 patients. Imagine if that decision could be made for 30 of those patients in seconds. That would mean that the workforce issues would be dramatically solved. You'd reduce errors, increase the accuracy of results, and those clever people can focus on the 10 patients who are particularly problematic. And that summarises what this is going to be doing. And then, of course, using the fantastic science we have in this building and other places, invent completely new treatments and interventions. So this is where we are. This is the campus. So just to orientate you, this is basically the AstraZeneca building, which you may be aware of. This is the entire biomedical campus. This is Royal Papworth Hospital here. We're sitting in this building here, which is the Cancer Research Building. And so what we're seeing in the middle of this great big wonderful car park, and that's exactly where the Cancer Research Hospital will be. And it's fantastic. It couldn't be positioned in a better place, because right next to our neighbours, this is going to have 2,000 scientists within it developing the latest diagnostics and treatments in AstraZeneca, and 70% of them are working on cancer. Here is the early detection effort and Adam Brooks Research Centre for doing clinical trials. Here's the Cancer Hospital and the LMB nearby. Here's the Cancer Research Institute and the LMB, which basically is a Nobel Prize factory. And so here we're going to have right in the heart of that the capacity to bring our scientists together. So Hugo's going to tell us a little bit about what's in that.
So what's it going to be? The plans that we have for a hospital, which is 7 floors, 24,000 metres squared, has outpatient clinics for oncology and haematology patients. It has a whole new, much bigger space for day treatment, including clinical trials and early phase clinical trials. All the patients will be in individual bedrooms, which for most people is a very significant improvement I mean, there are some people who like to be together and we have to work out that, but they will have individual patient bedrooms, which for most people is a great advance. There's going to be a dedicated ward for teenagers and young adults with cancer, and then specialised wards for cellular therapies, bone marrow therapies, and so on. So in terms of the clinical space, a great advance on what we are at the moment. This is what it's going to look like, and as Richard's given you the location. And this is how it's sort of set up. So if essentially the clinical floors are the bottom 5, and on the top we have the University Institutes, which Richard will talk about in a minute. So we have a sort of a way in on the ground floor, outpatients, and then hopefully you'll get a decent-ish view from the wards upstairs. Everything's going to be linked to the main hospital by a tunnel, and so actually if you do have to get across to Adam Brooks for anything urgently, the transit time is going to be very short indeed, and you won't have to go outside. That's it again, and again, and again. So it's going to look a lot nicer if anybody's been inside the real hospital to what we currently have. I think compared to what you heard David describing in his blog, you can see that the whole, this is the room, the inpatient room that he would have been sleeping in hopefully 5 years' time. So we effectively have 5 floors of NHS facilities, and then...
Yeah, and so these are the research institutes that we're positioning in the building specifically to deliver on the research aspirations. And the reason for this is that if we look across the NHS, so I was involved in writing the current NHS long-term plan for cancer with the National Cancer Board, and the NHS is a fabulous organisation, but a bit like a cronky car, like my car at the moment, you can't really stop it because the wheels will fall off. And so really we can't stop the entire NHS and inject into it innovation. But the wonderful thing about places like Cambridge is that you've got this collection of fantastic scientists, engineers, mathematicians, chemists, who with biologists like myself and clinicians can work together. And the difference that we're doing now is in the, just even 10 years ago, the way we would do science is not really think about the long-term impact. You have this aspiration that somehow it's going to affect patients and somehow it'll work in the NHS. But most of the stuff dies in the graveyard of the journals. So people publish stuff, they progress their careers. But actually, what does that research do? How does it impact the lives of patients who are coming from the region, who are in Peterborough, in Norfolk, in Norwich? How do we actually impact their lives? And so one of the things about embedding these research institutes in the hospital is we're not going to do anything that can't immediately be accessed by the NHS. And that's a complete transformation. How do we do our science and design it from the get-go so whatever the product is at the end of the day, it can work in the National Health Service? And that's a very different way of thinking than then trying to retrofit an idea at the end of the day into the NHS. And so the National Institute for Early Detection of Cancer, and we've got many representatives here, you should take time to talk with them, are clinician scientists, so people who are working at the front, at the coalface with patients, but designing those very early detection technologies that can work within the NHS, and so that they can be deployed immediately so that we can detect cancer as early as possible, as close to home as possible. So very simple technologies that can work, for example, in your own home or in GP surgeries. We have an Institute for Precision Breast Cancer Medicine, which is our leading programme. Not because we sort of picked breast cancer out above all the other diseases, but actually breast cancer served as a model for us. So we are using genomics, radiomics and other complex integrated technologies in breast cancer, but rapidly progressing that now into brain tumours, into ovarian cancer. So we're now spreading those technologies into the other cancer types. And then this thing which we call the Institute for Integrated Cancer Medicine, which is really fantastic. And so basically what this is working with industry, particularly GE Healthcare. It allows us to take everybody's data in different formats. So it could be the image from the X-ray that I talked about, histology from the section on the slide, a blood result. And normally we have to hold those results a bit like a hand of cards if you're playing bridge. I've never understood bridge. Or if you're playing poker and you work out which card is worth the most. You don't want to do that. You want to turn everything into a single card that summarises its value. And what this approach will do is take all of that information and produce a single result for the patient. And the exciting thing about that result is to use it not to just say, what will the patient be doing today and how do we need to change their treatment today, but how will that patient be doing in 6 months' time, in a year's time, so we can preempt what that patient will need. And that's exactly what this is designed to do. And it is actually already working in breast cancer. So I'm going to hand back to, I think, Hugo.
Me again. So where have we got to so far? So we heard a couple of weeks ago that the outline business case has been approved. So what that means is we have about £200 million guaranteed from the government in support of this, which is a fantastic start. And some of the team who wrote that case are here, and just I can't say thank you enough for getting that through. We've been submitted an application for planning permission. The conversations we've had with the council, we don't anticipate any real problems with planning permission, but you never know. So the government funding, although it covers basically the core NHS part of the hospital, it won't pay for all of it. So there is a need to just get over the line. We need a good effort in terms of raising money from philanthropy to ensure that we are able to keep to time. And if we can keep to time, that means breaking ground next year and opening at the latest in 2028 is where we are. So just my summary for what we said. Early treatment saves lives, and the main way that this project will save lives is by this process of early detection of cancer, identifying people at an earlier stage or even before they develop cancer at all. And there is nowhere else in the UK and very, very few people in the world who are doing research into this field, and it's the one area where we can really shift the dial in terms of long-term cancer outcomes. Using all available information, that's what Richard was talking about the integrated cancer medicine, will result in better treatment, more precise treatment, better outcomes, getting the right treatment for the right patient every time. And the key thing about that, or the key thing that we often forget, is not so much about getting the right treatment and giving people who need treatment. It's actually identifying people who don't need treatment and not giving them treatment. Because in some cancers, 90% of the people that we treat are getting no benefit from that treatment. And that obviously has a huge personal cost, but it has a financial cost as well. And if we can identify groups of people who don't need treatment, that is absolutely a win-win situation. And the other point is that whatever we do here has global application. This isn't just for us and our local population. You know, anything that we do here that works will work just as well in Saigon, in Shanghai, in Sydney, you know, around the world. And so a life saved here, we've said will save thousands of lives worldwide. But the point is global application for everything that we develop here. And the reason that we can do that, there's a couple of things. The first thing is the NHS. If you're going to do research into early cancer, you really need to have a single health system, something which combines primary care, you know, the GP service, and the hospitals. And the NHS as a single system is fantastically set up to do that. I would say it doesn't historically deliver on its potential. And one of the things that we want to do is to make it deliver on its potential. And as we've said, Cambridge is one of the very few places in the world wide where you have the right people to make these leaps of imagination in different disciplines to come across some of the answers that we need. So that's why we think we can do it here. And I think I'm handing back to Shelley.
Thank you both. I feel like that's a tough act to follow, really. We'll ask you some questions in a minute, but just to sum up, how you can help us change the story of cancer. We, as Adam Brooks Charitable Trust, need to raise £12 million to contribute and help this become a reality. The university is fundraising for the research institutes. We have fortunately secured £3.1 million so far to help with our cancer story. And we can't do it without you and with our supporters and with the people that you might know and the ideas that you might have in order for us to achieve that £12 million target that we have as a charity. I don't want to worry you. We're not here to ask you for money tonight. We're really here to ask for your thoughts and your ideas and for you to engage and have a conversation with us. So please don't think that my 12 million is a direct ask this evening. I'd just like you to watch this and then we'll come to some questions.
On the Friday, they did a biopsy and the doctor woke me up and says, "Lorraine, you've got a tumour. We need to operate on you now." And then when I came out of that operation 7 days, they said, "You've got stage 3 ovarian cancer." And,
So this is something that will be life-limiting. About 50% of people survive for 15 years or more. But I think it's important that you understand this isn't something that's going to go away.
Yeah. Wow, I don't know what to say.
Tears were just flowing. That's what it was. It was just non-stop tears. I have a history of breast cancer in my family. But when I found out that I was about to go through this, I was just like, no, this can't be.
And when I saw the oncologist, he offered me treatment, which he said he thought the average lifespan was about 10 to 12 months. If I didn't have any treatment, average lifespan would be about 6 to 8 months. Fortunately, I'm still here.
I've got a rough idea of what's going to happen. I'm going to be partially awake, but I'm going to be woken up during the surgery.
You just need to be a bit careful at the back, because that's close to where the part of your brain that moves the right-hand side of your body. Essentially, we're looking at the abnormalities in the genes that we think cause the tumour in the first place. So we're really able to drill down into the molecular problems in the tumour.
What is it about your breast cancer in this case that is different from the breast cancer that the patient sat next to you in clinic has? What is it about the molecular profile, the genetics, the radiology, the pathology that we see that means that we have to treat you differently? It is that question about you and about your individual cancer that is at the heart of the Cambridge Cancer Research Hospital.
Using AI to help doctors with complex but routine tasks is an absolute game changer. It gives back clinicians the gift of time, and it means that we can focus on the parts that only humans can do, which is actually caring for our patients.
We remove the prostate surgically to get rid of the cancer. By using a robotic approach, we can do this through very small cuts, which has less pain, less chance of complications and a faster recovery, out of bed, walking around, ready for their discharge the next day.
If we can detect it early, it's a completely different ballgame. So if you've got an early cancer, you may not even know you've got it yet. We can treat it down the endoscope. We can do microsurgery down the endoscope. We can burn away the lining. That's going to be an outpatient treatment. You'll be home the same day, and you can cure it.
In Cambridge, we have all the ingredients for success in cancer research. We have the basic scientists in their laboratories, we have the clinicians running clinical trials, and we have collaboration with the pharma industry, and most importantly, patients. And with those ingredients, we have the opportunity to move more quickly towards cure.
Life's very short, so I want to make the most of it. I just want to get the treatment I can to prolong my life, like 6 weeks of radiotherapy, 5 days a week.
The care that people receive in the future when you get the new Cancer Research Hospital will be level, at least, with what I'm getting now. And I think that's just such a brilliant thing for all patients.
I remember coming out of the hall and I would just give a big jump. I'm like, yeah, I'm out, I'm cancer free. And yeah, it was incredible.
I'm really hoping that with all the research and the trials and that they can detect ovarian cancer early, because every single one of us have been found advanced, and if they could find it early, they could save a lot more women.
We've probably all had friends or relatives that have stories similar to that, and all of the people that were in our slides earlier were patients, some friends and family in this room as well. So I think let's have some questions. Let's make Richard and Hugo work a bit even more harder. We've got this pink box that gets passed around instead of a microphone. So I'm told that when they're in here doing lectures, on a day-to-day basis that gets thrown around, but we've decided not to do that for health and safety purposes this evening. But do you want to come and join me at the table, and we'll see if we've got any immediate questions in the crowd, or I'll use one that I've prepared earlier. Shall I do that just to warm you all up? Oh, there we go, we have a question. You might wish you were throwing it, Megan, I'm sorry, have you running around.
I'd like to make a statement first. Whoever sits in these seats, I don't know how they stay awake because they're so comfortable.
You're assuming we do stay awake.
I heard on the news recently that there's going to be a blood test for finding cancer, and so I'd just like to know, is this true? Because the news doesn't always tell true stories. Is it true? And can you tell us anything about it, please?
I can start, and then. So I think you might be referring to the Grail, or the test that's come from Grail. So basically, this is a blood test, and what it picks up is the tumour sits in your body somewhere in a tissue, and bits of the DNA, the genetic information that actually encode the proteins that make the building blocks of those cells, break off and they get into the bloodstream and flow around the body. So if you take a blood sample, you can actually detect that DNA. Now, it's a little bit different than just detecting the DNA. The other thing that's special about DNA is that although it's made up of genes that sort of encodes the information, each of those genes has a switch at the front of it, on or off, which says this gene is going to be expressed and functional or it's going to be off. And we call that methylation. It's just a chemical change. It's actually that's picked up. And the reason why that's useful is it's a very specific pattern of those switches are found in each tissue in the body and actually in each cancer type. So the good news of it is that it might well help us to detect cancer early and also be sort of more generic. So rather than just testing for one cancer type, it might test for multiple types. The problem with the test is a couple of things. I mean, it's good news because it shows it works. And actually, there's a lot of that work going on in this building. And actually, one of the first tests ever developed and is now actually Medicare approved in the US was developed in this building for lung cancer. The challenge with the tests is they're often not that specific and they're often not that sensitive. So you might not pick up every patient with cancer. And of course, then if you're going to apply it across a population and you're only going to pick up a certain number of patients, does the cost of it make it worthwhile? So there are a lot of challenges ahead. It's not a perfect test, but the good news is, I think, is that the more people are used to this test being deployed in the community, in general practice, people start to think about early cancer, they start to think about screening better. And I think it is a mindset change. You know, we don't like to think about cancers. And one of the big challenges I think we're going to face with early cancer is actually ignorance is bliss to some extent. You don't want to know what you don't know. And actually the big message we have to get out is the earlier we know with you, the more likely you are you'll actually, first of all, not need very nasty treatment, but actually you'll be cured. And so steps that help us with that mode of thinking across the population are really useful. But Hugo, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I think that's right. And I'm quite sure that, you know, blood tests of one form or another obviously are much less invasive than endoscopies or whatever. So I'm quite sure that whatever, you know, algorithms we're designing for 5 or 10 years' time are almost certain to include something like the Grail test, whether it's that test or something that's, you know, another iteration of it down the line. I'm sure that will be a key part of what we're talking about.
Thank you.
Who can I throw it to?
Megan, down the front.
Oh, do I just speak? No, I say. Just very quick follow-up on that. I'm on the Grail trial, as was some of my family. I was really interested when I got it through the post as an invitation from somewhere or other. About when I was first involved with ACT, which was a very long time ago, every year we used to give a research grant to 3 PhD students. And when they used to come and give a presentation to a meeting when we were, and one of those was exactly this trial, trying to find circulating DNA fragments. And I thought at the time, oh gosh, I am going back at least 10 years. How interesting, that must be a really good idea.
Yeah.
And then to see it come sort of through the door with almost the very same ideas, I thought, gosh, I've got to get on that.
Great. Yeah.
Really, really, really interesting. I just wish that I I mean, I obviously can't remember who it was, but I would love to have know which student that was. That
I might have to dig into the archives. I mean, the great thing is the video contains individuals that ACT have funded through their early research careers as well as Jean's fabulous breast cancer programme as well. So, yeah, it's great that the funding that we are able to give, which isn't always the largest amount of funding, but the funding that starts it can create really, really big changes. So,
and I think if I may, one of the things that you said was that was over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And we're at a stage now where, you know, a test like that is just about going through trials. It'll probably be another 5 or 10 years before it actually is a marketable product that's actually doing what it's supposed to do. And this is something we've seen here, you know, that the cytosponge that you saw, I came here 23 years ago, the cytosponge was just about then had been invented, and there were videos of people taking it to see what it's like.
I remember that.
And it's literally, I think, last year that it's had its first major sort of authorisation, so it's over 20 years. One of the things that we want to do in this hospital is to accelerate that time. And actually, by bringing the right people together, by bringing the right expertise just in terms of the authorisation process and regulations and so on, and actually by, you know, bring the product to the patient and doing that time. We think that, and you know, the work that we've done suggests we can bring that time down by 3 or 4 years, which doesn't sound like much, but it actually is a huge impact in terms of benefits down the line.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I worked in cytology since 1980 something or other, and I remember, I mean, it didn't look we used to do that in swallowing sponges. But they didn't look like that one that you do now. And then looking at the cells that they produced, I mean, I'm just fantastic. It's amazing that it's actually now being used. Wonderful.
The student was Sarah Jane Dawson.
oh, okay, Sarah Jane Dawson, Jean's told us. Grant.
Oh, Ran.
And then Toff, I think.
Just going on there then, is it rather like the COVID task force? There's now going to be an Alzheimer's task force, isn't there? Do you not need a cancer task force just to bring these times down? Because 23 years from proof of concept to being used is... I mean, 130,000 people a year dying, that's...
Yes, so some of it is the intrinsic nature of the science. So what I mean by that is that if you want to detect cancer early and understand if it has an impact on mortality, which is largely accepted as a gold standard for early detection, you actually have to wait for enough patients to have lived long enough to have not died of their disease before it gets approval for that test. So to some extent, there are unsurmountable time barriers. But the critical thing, so I direct the Cancer Centre here, which is 1,500 physicians, scientists, nurses, allied healthcare professionals, and one of the big shifts we've had is rather than just to think about clever science as target product profiles, what are we actually trying to make at the end of the day that will go into patients? And actually by having the cancer hospital, that's based, as Hugo said, on proper economic modelling, what time was wasted, not those intrinsic latent aspects that we can't get around, but what bits were wasted that add on to that. And there is about 3 or 4 years. And then there's all the time wasting based on somebody's in the Cavendish lab or somebody is over at West Cambridge site and we're just not talking because we meet on a Wednesday. Actually, if you add all that up, you can get it down to about 4 to 5 years. And then you can start, but the critical thing about that is you can also stop bad ideas early. A lot of the hidden time is not just in making sure that good ideas get to the clinic quickly, but we don't waste time on bad ideas because we all have a finite amount of time, and there are many inventions that actually can be worked on by chemists, physicists, engineers, and the GP sees them and goes, no patient's ever going to do that. And so actually getting that insight very early from people who are on the ground and know how patients think is really important. And all of those things add up together to reducing the time wastage significantly.
Yeah, and I mean, you are absolutely right. We need to learn from the lessons of COVID in terms of accelerating, you know, things, products into the market. I suppose what I'd add to that, Rich is absolutely right. There is a intrinsically an early detection there is a longer lag than there is in a treatment, because if I give somebody a treatment, I can see immediately whether it's working or not. If I'm trying to prevent them from getting cancer, I won't know until 10 years later whether or not they've got cancer. So there is intrinsically a longer lag, and that is why almost nobody does research into it, because that time interval is beyond the frame for most grant funders' grants, or historically anyway, for most political time frames. So that's why it's always historically been a problem to do research into early cancer, and that's why we've committed to doing it, or one of the key reasons we've committed to doing it.
But the point you make, again, is a really good one, because the other aspect it's making us do is think how quickly we can get readouts. So if we think about drugs, actually the way we assess the activity of a drug is really bad. So basically you'll get 20 patients on a clinical trial, you'll give them a drug, then you'll do an MRI scan maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks later, and you'll literally have someone with a ruler measuring whether the tumour's shrunk. Well, that's bonkers, right? Because you don't understand what's happening in terms of the biology of the cell. So what we're doing in the centre here, and actually we have one of the world's best image scientists here, is developing biological tracers. So actually within one dose of a drug, you can see whether the cells are dying in the tumour. Because if they're not dying, or they're not stopped growing, or the biology is not eating chemicals that it needs to survive, then you know pretty quickly whether that drug's working or not. So it does get to that issue I mentioned about the way we've trained in the past. We're practicing medicine using a system that was designed 70 years ago. And actually the way we approach clinical trials, what's the gold standard for a result in a clinical trial? How many patients do you need on a clinical trial? The more precise we can get, the more we can start re-evaluating those things. And actually if you've got really well-defined groups of patients, you probably only need 5 to 10. Because if you absolutely know how a drug works, and you absolutely know who these patients are, if you don't see a signal in 10 patients, you're done. So we need to stop also the old way of doing things, which again the hospital can help us do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Utterly compelling talk. Really appreciate it. I'd talk about the hospital itself, and in particular, who gets the 77 beds. Are those 77 people who are currently in the existing facility, or are they just additional research beds? Is it extra capacity? Is it big enough? So on.
Well, the answer to your question is a combination of all of those. So we currently have in the main hospital about 65 beds for oncology, haematology and teenage young adult patients. So it is a significant expansion. We are by some distance the smallest in terms of inpatient footprint of any major cancer centre in the UK, but that's partly because of our geography. And one of the things is, we don't really want people to have to come to the hospital if they don't have to. We'd much rather, if you live in Bury St Edmunds, you have treatment in Bury St Edmunds. We'd much rather if you live in Great Yarmouth, you have treatment in Great Yarmouth. And the challenge for this hospital is how we can give those doctors treating the patients, because wherever in the eastern region, going from Derby to Great Yarmouth, wherever you are, if you have a biopsy for a genomic analysis, that biopsy comes to Cambridge for analysis. So the challenge for us is how we can take that information and the other information that we may have on individual patients and give back to the doctor in Derby or Great Yarmouth or wherever the information that will enable them to make the same decision as if the patient was sitting in front of us in Cambridge. So it's very deliberately not a huge thing to bring people in. What we're trying to do is to give the quality of care and treatment to people around the region. Having said that, there are some treatments that have to be given in a specialist centre, and particularly the new cellular therapies, which we think are likely to revolutionise the way we treat not just cancer actually, but some non-malignant conditions as well. And this is where you take cells from the patient's own body and engineer them to be targeted against a particular cancer, or might be you're giving cells which will regenerate your knee cartilage actually, but cellular therapy's got a big thing. And for those, you need to give quite strong treatments which will suppress the patient's own immune system, and also they can have a range of undesirable side effects which require the the fantastic people that we have who know how the liver works, and the neurologists and the intensive care people and so on. So those you can only do here, and there's a very significant expansion of the capacity to do that sort of treatment. So at the moment we have 20 beds, and we'll have about 45 beds to do those sorts of treatments in the new hospital.
Thank you.
Any other questions? They haven't given you a hard time on the questions, have they? I've got one. Oh, we've got one, good.
Whenever I get these things, I always feel compulsion to sing my way or something. Your initial research into early diagnosis seemed to be concentrating on breast cancer. Do you expect what you learn from that will read across to the other cancers, or will each of the cancers have to have their own project to work through the research in the same way that the breast cancer one's doing? I was just thinking in terms of timing.
Yeah, so breast cancer, and Jean's here actually, Professor Jean Abraham, who directs our precision breast cancer program, so she can talk to this. But actually, the early detection work is broader than that. So what the breast cancer field has led on is that integration of multiple data sets, which actually might be in individuals with established cancer. The early detection is much broader. And so the cytosponge, for example, is actually for the changes in the esophagus that you get before you get esophageal cancer. But we have one of the world's leading centres for blood cancers for what we call clonal hematopoiesis. So what that means is that the cells that go bonkers, they're going to make your leukemia in an adult, they go bonkers about 15 years before you actually know you've got leukemia. And you can see them in the blood, and they're growing and expanding and duplicating themselves, and they've got the mutations in them that ultimately will cause the disease that we know as leukemia, when it's much harder to treat. And so actually we have some of the world's leaders in this to try and understand, actually, if we know this is going to happen 15 years beforehand and we can pick it up, are there medicines that we can give to stop it in its tracks so it never develops into leukemia? And then there are other examples in sort of the rest of the gut we're also working on. So, and then there's prostate. Tom's here who works on prostate cancer. So actually most of the cancers we have a broad spread of early detection efforts. But you do make a really important point, is one of the great advantages of the cancer centre is what's learnt in one space can be immediately shared, because it unites the different investigators across the pool. And Jean, who's leading the precision breast cancer programme, has shared a lot of that information with Richard Mayer, who you saw on the screen. He was a neurosurgeon. And actually, we've pretty much lifted and shifted everything that's been done in the precision breast cancer program to invent a precision brain tumour program. And, you know, Jean, you might want to summarise what that is, but...
Yeah, I mean, essentially, breast and brain are very different cancers. Breast is very common, whereas brain is much rarer, has a much worse prognosis in that presentation. But what Richard, Mayer and I have done is really taken those two different diseases and taken the technology, looking at your DNA profile. Sorry, looking at your DNA profile and seeing if that can help either predict how you're going to do or what treatments you might need, and just look at the commonalities of how it's looked at by the genomics team, how you deliver it into the clinic, and just lots of those things are just models of working or ways of doing things that can transfer easily from one system to another. So, I mean, it's the great thing about the Cancer Centre that we actually all talk to each other, work together and share our expertise.
I think you say it unites them, but I think it also ignites them to to pursue their own areas too, doesn't it? You talked about A&E, people that present at A&E having bad outcomes. Why is that the case? I mean, I probably could guess, but your thoughts on that, Richard?
Well, I mean, I can comment and Hugo can comment on that. I mean, I think that there's multiple reasons. You can imagine, you know, many individuals, I mean, certainly my experience in talking to adult oncologists, I'm a children's cancer doctor, but when children present with cancer, the parents know there's something fundamentally wrong. They already know that. Anyone who ignores a mother is an idiot. So basically, they already know, and they've known for some time that something wrong with the child. They just didn't want to seek medical attention because they didn't want to know it. And there are a proportion of individuals who present late in A&E, and they've known there's something bad wrong. They just didn't want to present. And that really speaks to this issue of making early detection part of our culture, making those early interventions and helping people understand that actually the earlier we know, the better it is, not the worse it is. And that's very important to get the message out. Other people, some cancers are very aggressive, and there are cancers like pancreatic cancer and even ovarian cancer where they are very silent killers. You really don't know they're there until they're at such a size or they're causing blockage to some particular anatomical structure, which means, you know, you do start to have problems, and then it's only then that you would know about it.
Yeah.
The challenge with A&E is the kind of symptoms that cause someone to go to accident emergency really tell you that the cancer is at that size or in that critical state where it's going to cause problems, and that often portends late diagnosis and tells you that they're late, which is why they do work badly.
Yeah, that's why I say I think you have to think about how cancer kills people ultimately. Actually, the truth is sometimes we really don't know, but in principle, you know, it either spreads locally or it spreads through the channels that we have to transmit various fluids through our body. And by the time a cancer gets to be about 1 millimetre cubed, so 1 millimetre in diameter, it's already developing those channels, those blood vessels that will potentially allow it to spread. And, you know, it's pretty unlikely at that size to be causing any symptoms. So for something to cause an admission to an accident emergency department, typically things are several centimetres in size, so multiples in terms of thousands, millions of multiples in terms of the number of cells and things available. And they're just that much more advanced, that much more harder to treat than when things are smaller and more coherent.
So we haven't just got to change the story of cancer, we've got to tell the story of cancer to get people less afraid to...
Well, communication's absolutely critical, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, any other questions? Shall I draw it to a close so that you can perhaps ask some of the experts in the room, quite a few of them. But we also are lucky to have Reese outside, who has a laparoscopic piece of kit, which you'll all get to have a go on if you like. Apparently you can try your hand on a test demo kit to pick up a polo or build a tower of polos, I understand, but you'll see for yourselves. So please do join us for a drink outside and speak to the team. We'd really love to hear your ideas on how we can bring this hospital to a reality. If you have friends that you'd like to introduce us to, if you'd like to hear more from us, volunteer with us, whatever you can do to work with us. We've seen the power of our work. Jean is my little shining star there, because the personalised breast cancer is a really important project that we funded and our supporters funded by raising over £1 million to do that. So let's do it again, and let's give all of these amazing surgeons, consultants, research scientists the environment to cure and change the story of cancer. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you outside. Thank you.
Thank you.
have to get just saying to Christopher, the word cancer to a patient automatically as thought is
no, it's terrifying.
Because we've got some luck to get the message that things are being done.
But it's not the word it was even 20 years ago, 10 years ago, was it? 20 years ago, even more terrifying, 10 years less so now. People say cancer is not instant.
Do you think it has?
I think so personally, yeah. I think it's a much less of a scary word, especially with breast cancer.
It used to be a secret, didn't it, as well? Quite a lot of people would say yes, because they didn't want people
So
to
many
think
of
they
them
were
are
getting
already
cancer.
surviving if they can report early cancer. And that's the whole point about how this will change what cancer means to people for forever in the future. Catch them early is just a word you sort of want to discover it, deal with it, move on.
Absolutely. And it disappears, isn't it? So nothing else.